Hi, moms. Welcome to the show. On today's episode, I'll be joined by Amanda Bennett, a podcast guesting strategist and the visionary behind the Podcasting Moms Club community, which I am a member of. Together, we're chatting about the world of podcasting and whether moms should use their passions to start their own show. Now, I wanted to bring Amanda on because she brings a very refreshing, low-pressure approach to this subject. So I thought she'd be the ideal guest today. I also want you to mark your calendars for next week when I'll be sharing a step-by-step guide on how to launch your own podcast. But for now, let's get into this episode. Welcome to Mometize Your Passion, a place for moms with big dreams and an eagerness to turn them into a thriving reality. Whether you're a mom seeking to monetize your talents, transition from a stagnant job, or explore a lucrative side hustle, you're in the right place. I'm Terralon, a wife and mother transitioning from a top 5% sales career to become the founder and publisher of Tinseltown Mom. I wear so many hats: former actress, current writer, celebrity blogger, certified life coach. And through it all, I've discovered the power of honing our gifts, learning from our past, and using our experiences to uplift others. Join me on this journey as I explore stories of mompreneurs outlining the road to their success. I'll also be sharing actionable business and money-making tips to guide you towards concrete ideas for generating income. Here, my hope is that you'll find inspiration from God, encouragement, and practical insights to mometize your passion. So today we're talking about starting a podcast to pursue your passion. And I know you had a podcast years ago, Gotcha Mama. Why don't you tell us about that time when you started your podcast, why you decided to do it, and all that other stuff?
So, yes, now I am in the podcast industry, quote unquote. Been doing it for a while, had my podcast from 2019 until 2021, and I'm still in podcasting, but I did not start out with a background in podcasting or public speaking or any of that. I didn't know any of the tech. So if you're listening and you think, oh, I just don't have any experience and I don't need to start a podcast, that was not the case at all when I first started. I started out shortly after my first daughter was born. So I was in corporate for many, many years, over a decade. I was doing nonprofit fundraising professionally. And when my daughter was born, I had a lot of really difficult things with postpartum. I had mentally and physically just things I did not anticipate, things that I didn't even really know could be an issue. My daughter had a dairy protein allergy, so she wasn't breastfeeding. There was just no sleeping, a lot of anxiety and depression that I kind of chalked up to, oh, this is what they call baby blues. When looking back, that was not the case. And I'm very, very fortunate that I got through that without additional support and medication and everything. No judgment any way, shape, or form if you need that. I was very glad to come out on the other side of that and now realize what would have helped me by having these conversations with moms. So that was very important to me when I felt the call on my heart, like God really put it on my heart to want to go back and have something for myself that was of service to people and not go work for someone else 60 hours a week and leave my baby. And that was just not for me. It didn't feel like a good fit for me. God really had this calling for me to help serve moms. And I think back to the story when I was newly a mom in my early postpartum, and I was at my breaking point. And I was like, I was at church talking to a friend, and I thought for sure I couldn't share these things because people would think I was a horrible mom. They would think I didn't know what I was doing. They would just totally judge me. And I was ashamed. And so when I shared all these challenges I was having, particularly with breastfeeding, because it's supposed to be so natural, right?
Mm-hmm.
The mom I was talking to, instead of shaming me and telling me, look, you're doing it all wrong or looking at me weird, she just listened. So it felt so affirming and so just really great to feel seen and heard and accepted. And then of course she gave me nipple cream for my my chapped nipples. And that's what sticks in my head about that experience is literally and figuratively supporting me as a mom. And
Mhm.
that's what I wanted to be able to create for other moms with the podcast. So we talked all about the joys as well as the challenges of motherhood with young kids early on. I brought on guest experts, and that was just the start of something inside of me where being creative to put together who I want to talk to and how I want the conversation, the questions that I want to ask. That was something I had not tapped into in a really long time for myself, that creativity and being connected to people in that way.
Mhm.
So that was when I first started podcasting, that it just a light bulb went off.
I love that. And now I can see your servant's heart. You came from nonprofit and you still wanted to serve through this podcasting community to help other moms. Were you even thinking that this was going to be a business, or was it literally like just something you were going to voluntarily just give to moms?
No, it was Tiralon. It was something that was just put on my heart just to do this, to serve moms, and knowing that something could come out of that into a business. And
Mhm.
it was one of the few times in my life I didn't overthink something. I typically have to have things planned out and know a million different ways that it could go and plan for that. But this time I really just trusted the process and jumped in, and I said, I'm just going to figure this out.
Yeah.
And um, so that it usually does not go that way for me. It really was just about trusting the process and serving and knowing that whatever happens is what is supposed to happen.
The approach I took when I started my podcast, I did all these courses and I was really, and at the time I was working a full-time job.
Yeah.
So I was super busy. It was a very stressful time for me because I wanted to make sure I did it all right. I didn't do it all
Yeah.
right, but that's good that you just kind of went with it. Like God placed that on your heart to start it then the way that you started it, to serve other moms. And He had a plan that you couldn't see, especially since this wasn't your normal process.
Totally. And when we get to the some of the other stuff we talk about, I'm going to say that's not what I recommend you do. um, but that I will, God knows me better than I know me. So he knew I wasn't going to start it if I had sat down to really think through the questions that I recommend you think about before you start a podcast. Because
Yes.
like you, I get so caught up in I want to do this the best way I can do it. I want to do this, I'm going to read all the research. I'm going to go do the course. But I think for me at that time, the most important step for me was doing it,
Hmm.
and learning as I went was what I needed to take away from that experience.
Right.
Now I'm at a different place.
Yes, right. So just for some other moms who are listening, like what type of fulfillment do you feel like you got during that time? Because there's moms listening, they have passions and gifts, and maybe they want to share that with other moms. They don't know how to do it. So that's why we're talking about, maybe if podcasting is the right platform for them. Like what
Yeah.
you can just think back during that time, like what kind of fulfillment do you feel that you got out of that
Yeah.
then?
That's a great question. And I think some of those it's hard to measure because one of the biggest things for me, especially if you think about, I was the tail end of my podcast happened during the pandemic
Hmm.
and we were isolated. So the only interaction with other people, connection outside of my own home was with my guests. And that was so life-giving. So that connection through people that I have on, those conversations, those deep conversations, the creativity that I get to decide, it's not a boss telling me I need to do this thing. It's me creating this thing that's going to help people. That was so fulfilling. And then through those conversations, through deciding what topics do I want to talk about, what conversations do I want to have, it was a really great chance for me to figure out what's important to me. I think a lot of times moms, we get into this mode of just helping everybody else and thinking about everybody else. And we don't take the time. I know I had not, even in my career, taking the time to sit down and go, what's really important to me here? What do I like to do? And that gave me the opportunity and the space to think about and to pursue those things.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. And, I like to talk about passion and purpose on the show. And just the idea that you were saying that you had this complicated pregnancy, you went through all these challenges. I think that's also telling because I feel like, the challenges that we go through and we grow through, I mean, that's going to help somebody. And you probably don't even realize how many people you helped by having that podcast on for 2 years, because maybe they needed to listen to a certain episode that you were able to share and it could have saved their life. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So even pursuing a passion, I mean, I know there's a difference between the passion and the purpose, or maybe they can be intertwined. It could get complicated. But I feel like part of your purpose during that time was to take what you went through and what you had grown through and to help someone else with that. And that's what you did. And I think podcasting is a great outlet for moms to be able to get that out, whether you're thinking about starting a business or you have a business and you want to use podcasting as an outlet to share your knowledge or what you went through. I just think like moms listening to really think about that. And I always say, pray about it before you start it, just to make sure it's something that you feel like God is telling you to do, because it can get overwhelming having a podcast and you have all these other things on your plate and you're trying to manage it
Yes.
all. So I love that you shared that story. And what were some of the topics that you talked about on your show?
Yeah, we talked about postpartum depression. We talked about physical health as well, how to stay healthy, all the things that we talked about child sleep. We talked about, but I think in having those conversations, like I mentioned, deciding what I wanted to talk about was finding out where my passion was taking me. Like,
Mhm.
what do I want to talk about? What do
Mhm.
I want to share? And those were the things that spoke to me were the physical health and mental health for moms.
That's good. And then I
Yeah.
know that you're still helping moms, with the services that you provide. Now, what was the pivotal moment that made you think, okay, I need to transition this podcasting into something else so I'm helping moms in a different way? What was that like?
Yeah. So I just want to talk about the decision to wrap up my podcast too, because that was a really hard decision. I love doing it. And I did get feedback from people saying they loved an episode. And that, to me, that was the measurement of, is this fulfilling the purpose for it? Right. Is
Mhm.
having people say, I love this episode. It really spoke to me. Thank you for sharing. So I knew that it was doing that. But at the same time, like your great advice about pray about it, think about all the things that go around it. That tail end. So in that second year of podcasting, I was about to have another baby. The pandemic had just started. There was a lot of things happening. And I wasn't clear about the direction of how to monetize it that I wanted to go. I knew all the options, but I didn't feel really strongly and like anything felt aligned at the moment. And at that point, I felt like God was giving me the okay to release that, to say that's okay to pause. But
Mhm.
I loved podcasting so much. I had made so many connections with guests and other hosts that it just organically worked out for me to have conversations with, hey, could you help me with this? Or hey, do you have an idea about this for my podcast? And I loved the guest aspect of my podcast. And I knew from people pitching me, there were a lot of really bad pitches out there. People didn't know how to authentically and effectively pitch themselves and didn't really know what made a good guest for a podcast. And I understood all that. And I really was excited about the opportunity to help other podcasters to grow their podcast and to use that as a tool to grow their audience so they could help more people and speak to more people with their message.
That's good. That's good. Now, what year was this? 2021 or 2020
Yes.
was the pandemic? 2021.
So 2021 is when I shifted everything over into focusing on podcast guesting.
Now, can you think of some ideas if there is a mom like vacillating on this? Oh, should I start a podcast? Because, okay, again, if you're listening, there's many topics that you can talk about on a podcast, not just pregnancy or, the life of a mom. You could be a crafter, you can be an
Oh, yeah.
artist, you can be a storyteller. Like you can have a podcast on pretty much any subject. You just have
Oh,
to be
yeah.
creative in how you want to broach it to people and get that information out. Now, can you just think of any ways that a podcast can bring joy to a mother, like any other ideas that maybe we didn't talk about?
I think the connection and the creativity
Mhm.
and learning, I learned so much from my guests that I
Mhm.
took in my own life. So I think that's a great opportunity to think about what you'd like to learn more about and
Mhm.
have conversations. People love to come. Maybe you think it's an expert or somebody who had maybe not even an expert in a business field, but somebody who has done something that you want to do
Mhm.
and you'd love to talk to them, but you think, well, they're probably not going to meet me over coffee or just meet me over Zoom. People are very receptive if you have to having them on a podcast to share on a platform. And by doing that, you learn and you gain so much by interviewing them. So I
Yeah.
think that's another way that I can think of. Yeah. And I know you've got lots of, I'm sure you can add to that conversation too.
Yeah, I think it's a great outlet for moms too, who are on, like, even for me, like when I have a guest on, I'm always getting like these aha moments. I'm learning different strategies and tools. Like you could literally, let's say because I was talking to someone I was coaching and they have an ongoing chronic illness, and they were talking about how they wanted to help other people who are suffering through chronic illnesses. Like you
Yeah.
could literally have your doctor on your show, and it's therapeutic because you're not only getting advice from your doctor, but that doctor is sharing to other people who may need to hear that advice as well. And it can literally be life changing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's so many benefits actually. But with that, like I always say, you should have goals. Like you don't, I wouldn't just, unless God is saying just start it, forget about the goals, unless he's saying that. I
Yes.
always say you should have measurable written goals written
Yes.
down. If you're going to start a podcast, what is that going to look like? Are you going to record it once a week, twice a
Yep.
week? Make sure it's manageable for your life, so you're not getting into something and you really can't finish it. And
Oh,
Amanda,
yeah.
you seem like you're a very organized person. So what are some strategies and systems that you use for yourself that you think might be helpful for someone who may be thinking about it?
Yeah. And that is such great advice to your lawn because I do feel like, my case is a little bit different, but I do recommend because I've seen so many people get tripped up if they just start it without thinking about those things. The
Mhm.
number one that I did actually think about. So if you don't do anything else, do think about what is your goal with the podcast? Why do you want to do the podcast? And that goes for whether you have a business podcast, a hobby podcast, whatever type of podcast you're going to start. And then having a way, like you mentioned, to measure that. And it does not have to be downloads, it doesn't have to be clients gained. That is
Mhm.
personal to you and whatever goal you have for that podcast. But I think if you don't have a way to measure it, this is the kicker. If you don't
Mhm.
have a way to measure whether you're being successful, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to get just you're going to think like what's the point, and you're going to give up, and that is a disservice to the people who are going to benefit from you sharing.
Right.
So I think that I just wanted to say that because I love that you mentioned that, um, and how your goal and your capacity, so time wise, thinking through how long this is actually going to take to do all the things,
Mhm.
because I think, people don't necessarily know until you start how long is it going to take to plan an episode, to record an
Mhm.
episode, to edit an episode, to promote an episode. How long is it going to take to get a guest on? So
Right.
I do batching, which I'm sure you batch
Mhm.
also. So that just means doing the same task for multiple episodes at a time. So I'm probably recording 3 or 4 episodes, or I'm interviewing 3 or 4 guests on the same day, or I am editing 3 or 4 episodes all together. So you're doing the same type of activity for more than just one episode at a time.
Right.
Once you get in the flow, it'll make it easier. So you're not getting in and out of that. I started out with Asana and then I went to Trello and now I'm in Notion. And it doesn't really matter what project management system you have, but I highly recommend you use some sort of project management system, even if it's just a Google spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Tracking and planning is going to help you so much. Um, and then calendar management also is why I use Calendly. You use Calendly. When I
Mhm.
first started, I did not, and quickly realized if I'm going to have guests, I'm going to have some sort of system here.
Yeah.
And similar to that, so a workflow for guest onboarding, guest management, if you have guests applying or if you have guest outreach, having a system for that and some copy paste kind of templates and swipes is going to save you a lot of time. But understanding the amount of work and what is required before, so you can be consistent. Because like you said, Tiralon, consistency doesn't have to be hour-long episodes, doesn't have to be 3 episodes a week. Whatever your consistency is going to help you be successful over so many other things.
Mhm.
So that's the one thing that whatever's going to help you to be consistent.
Yeah, I love that you said all that. And that's why I have you on because you make it seem like, okay, it's no stress. Like, do what you can do. Don't stress about the numbers. Don't stress about how many times per week you're going to record. What can you do? What is your capacity for this? So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Everything that you mentioned, some moms are probably feeling overwhelmed by all of those CRM systems and project management systems that you just mentioned. When you first started, did you have it all together like that? Or did you start simply with like a spreadsheet or you were on your Google Docs? Like, what?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Google Docs are still my best friend. I mean,
Yeah.
I rely a lot on Google Docs for, like I said,
Mhm.
outlines for episodes. You just templates, all kinds of templates. And some of that, just know, I want to say this too, just know that this is hard for perfectionists or recovering perfectionists. Whatever you start out with does not have to be perfect. It's gonna change, it's gonna evolve, it's gonna get better. You just have to start with something. So templates, I did have some templates, and I think I did use a Google spreadsheet, and then it got to be where I realized I want to add more information. And so that's when I went into Trello or Asana. I can't remember which one. And then I was able to add some more information that I wanted and be able to create that project workflow. Um, so yeah, it can be something super simple. It honestly can be as simple as looking at your physical calendar and blocking out a day and writing editing, writing, recording, whatever that is, just
Mhm.
making sure that you have a documented process for it so you can rinse and repeat. That's going to be your best friend.
Yes, that's good. And then I do want to talk a little bit about monetization. I mean, we're not going to get too heavy into monetization, but just like as an overview, because there's some thinking, or wondering how can I make money from a podcast? So, of course, one of the ways you can make money is if you have a business and you're starting a podcast, you're promoting your services, you're promoting your products, or maybe you are launching products or services and you're using the podcast as a platform to market. Can you think of any other ways that a mom can monetize a podcast?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the first way that always makes it's the easiest way to get into and to start seeing the needle move. But there's affiliates. You can be an affiliate for someone else's product. There's a lot of, it doesn't necessarily have to be them inserting an ad into your podcast. You can organically mention the link in your episode, or you can put it in your show notes, or whatever you want to do to have your affiliate link for products or services. You can start out, if you think you're going to do any kind of ad. I would start out, this was recommended to me and it was such great advice, is start out with a spot in your episode for that ad. And you don't have to have one ready to go. You can, do an ad for something else. Maybe it's just an ad for yourself, for your podcast, or for someone else's podcast, whatever, like a placeholder for that, so that your audience gets used to having some sort of ad there, and in your workflow, you've got that going. So ads, sponsorship ads, you're not going to make $1 million doing sponsorships.
Yeah.
I want to set the expectation for that. There are platforms where you can do that. I have seen some podcasters secure local sponsorships for more than what a running sponsorship ad may go in the industry. So, again, you're not going to make $1 million. The CPM, so the cost per 1,000 listeners, somewhere around $20. So that is for a sponsorship ad that someone's going to get on there. But I know people who've gone out with a local connection and got an ad that a business or a person in the community was willing to spend $100 or something, another amount, and you can work that out with them. So you can also leverage other assets. So if you have a blog or if you have a newsletter, there's other ways you can provide value for them that you can package into that. So that sponsorship is another way. Affiliates. There's the other up and coming platforms on Substack and some of these other Patreon, where there's additional content at a subscription price. So you could have a paywall where you have exclusive content or additional content for $5 a month, and somebody could do that. You could do workshops or Q&As or whatever exclusive content your audience would really want to have. And again, that's probably not, unless you have a huge audience, probably not going to make a ton of money, but it could be a good, consistent income there to help you at least pay for the podcast and maybe get you started on some other things. So there are other ways to do that. Yeah. And I'm probably leaving out some others too. I mean, you can leverage events, paid workshops. Like there's a lot of things you can do kind of outside of that typical monetization.
That's awesome. So what are some questions that a mom can ask herself if she's thinking about a podcast and if it's the right thing for her?
Some of those questions we already talked about.
Yes, we
I
did.
do want to bring those back up is, why do you want to have a podcast? What is the reason, the purpose for this podcast? And then how are you going to measure that you're being successful? And your success is determined by you, nobody else. So I think that's the first thing I would highly recommend, just sitting down to figure out. It doesn't have to be perfect and it may change over time, but figuring that out before you start is going to benefit you in being able to keep going and reach your goals. And the second thing is, what is your capacity? And that means, how much time do you have? How much money do you have? Like, how much, looking at the things it's going to take to create and produce a podcast. It's not a lot, but there are a few things you're going to need. And then what kind of access and support do you have around being able to continue to do it? So do you have a community of support to help you keep going? Do you have access to resources that you're going to answer your questions as you keep going? Because I don't know about you, but the only thing I found to be more overwhelming and challenging than starting a podcast was actually keeping a podcast going. So I think it can be, once you've hit that 10 episode mark or 20 episode mark, there's sort of a plateau where you start to have a lot of questions that you didn't know you were going to have. And so having somewhere to go, a community or some like a Facebook group, a community like Podcasting Moms Club, shameless plug right here, the Podcasting Moms Club, to go and ask those questions and to be able to get answers and resources from people who understand where you're at there. That's going to help you tremendously.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. As we wind down the conversation, is there anything else you can think of that we didn't cover that may be helpful for a mom listening?
All these were so good, Tirlon. I mean, I think really that is the first step. Like, let's just simplify everything. The first step is, yes, you can start a podcast. There is no reason why you are totally capable. There's no, you don't have to have $1 million or 1 million followers or have some big, amazing goal of what you want to accomplish. If there's something, if you have a passion, and you feel like this could be a really great outlet for you, you like to share, you listen to podcasts, or you know the people that you want to share this message with that you have, they listen to podcasts, try it out. Start a podcast, answer these questions. Step 1, answer the question, what do I want to do? What do I want to achieve with this? How do I know that it's working, that I'm doing what I want to do? Like, how do I know this is being successful? I think that's step 1. And then the rest of it, don't think about that until you've got that figured out.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Amanda, for being here. This was so great. Prayerfully, some moms, this is helping them in a lot of different ways. Now, where can people find you if they want to know more about you and what you do?
Yeah. So the easiest way, I would love for you to connect with me on Instagram. I'm trying to not get too bogged down with Instagram. Mental health is important to me, but I do like to connect with people there, and I tend to share things there more than anywhere else. So it's at Gotcha Mama on Instagram. And then please, if you are even thinking about starting a podcast, then we'd love to have you inside the Podcasting Moms Club. And you can find the link to find out more and join through my Instagram link. Or if you go to gotchamama.com/club, you can learn more there too. And I would love to be able to support more moms who have this passion and feel like they are called and want to start a podcast. There's not enough moms. Like, my whole reason of wanting to do this is I genuinely believe that there's not enough moms out there sharing their voice, their knowledge, and their passions and their experience. There's so much we can learn.
Thanks so much for listening today. And be sure to come back next week where I share a step-by-step process on how to start your own podcast. If this show blesses you, would you please do me a huge favor and share it with another mom? As you know, this show is meant to be a blessing to mothers, so any support you can give would be so appreciated. Until next time.